Materials in Unreal Engine look slightly similar to other node-based materials that you might see in another software, but quite different from Rhino that some of you might be familiar with. We're going to start by importing some materials that we looked at briefly before, and we can get materials either from Fab that we looked at before. We can click here on the materials and textures, and usually we get all sorts of different packs. Again, we don't want to look at the ones that cost lots of money for now. You can click on low, and then you can search obviously for something specific. And here we can see that we get a bunch of different kinds of things like tiles and different materials. We're going to instead start by looking at and importing something from Quixel Bridge, and we open it up. We click on surfaces, and let's get a brick material. Let's get this one. Click download. Which didn't work somehow. Let's try and see if we can drag it in. Yes. So dragging it in, we can see here then that if we zoom in, this cube now has this material. And how to find the material in, because we dragged it in, and now it's like, where is it? We know how to find it. But there's another way to find materials, and that is by clicking on the object that the material is attached to, and under the detail panel where I have all the different settings, under general you can see that it says materials here, and there we have it. And we can click on this question mark folder button, and it will open up the location. So we can see here that there's a texture for the albedo and one for the normal map and the material. And materials like this that are pre-made often has something. If we open it up, we get here a preview. We'll have an instance and a parent material. So in this case, there's a parent material. I'm going to make this slightly smaller so we can see the overview. So these settings will not change the parent material, which is a separate one, which is where all of the different, in this case, Quixel Megascans materials stem from. In this case, we can change some instance in settings for just this material. So we can see here, if we go from the top, for global, we can change the tiling. So we can here, for instance, rotate the tiling. If we wanted to come at a different angle, we can stretch it, which didn't seem to work. But we can also here under tiling, we can then change the tiling for all of the different directions. So if we wanted to match the object better, we can here go and do this. We can then offset it or scale it, etc. We can also here change the tint. So if we wanted to have a sort of bluish tint or whatever color we want, gonna cancel here. Not sure what this one does. And then we can also change a bunch of other settings. We want it to be more reflective. We can change the roughness to be, if we zoom in here now, we can see that this is now quite reflective. We can also change how intense the normal map is. So like basically like how much the actual texture will stick out. And we can also change which texture maps are linked here, which normally we wouldn't have to do. So, and then we want to save before we close. So with this we can get quite far. There's a lot, as we just saw, both in Fab and in Quixel Bridge, a bunch of different pre-made materials. But if you want to make something from scratch, either, as we saw with our imports from Rhino, we do get materials that come directly from Rhino, but we can also make our own materials from scratch, for which we would create a new folder, call it materials, and just like we called all static matches or 3D objects SM_, I would suggest that when you click add here for a new material, you call it M_, and then whatever you're planning to do. If we open it, you'll get a slightly different view to the one that we saw. This is the base material layout, and it always has this kind of component here that we can connect things to. So we see base color, metallic, specular, roughness, so on and so on and so on. So at the moment it has nothing. We can in fact try to just apply this to another object just to see what it looks like. It's just gray, nothing. Open it up again, make it slightly smaller so we can see the effects. So to add something here, we can either right click and search, so we can search for something that we want, or we can use shortcuts. For a value of just 0 to a number, we can hold in 1 on our keyboard and click. If we want a color, which is 3 values, RGB, then we hold in 3 on our keyboard to get a 3-value color changer, and then we can go in and change this to a different color. And again, that is holding in 3 on your keyboard and clicking anywhere, and you get one of those. So then we can try to connect this to the base color, and then we have a purple colored object. We save and it should update. Let's say we want to change then the metallic value. We want to make it metallic, then it only works with the value, so we can then connect this one. So 0 means 0 metallic. If we change to 1, you can see that it now has a sort of metallic layer to it. If we want to make it very glossy, then we need another value. We could connect it, and now it has 0 roughness, which means that it's a mirrored object, and we can update that. Now we see how we have a mirrored object, but with this color. If you want to make a perfect mirror, then you would want this to be completely white, by the way. Now we have a perfect mirrored object, but that's not what we want. And we want this to be slightly higher, so we can type in, try a different roughness. That's quite rough. Do 0.4 maybe. And quite often you would want to have actually a texture linked to this. And to do that, we hold in T, or we can also, by right-clicking, search for it, texture sample, and we get the same thing. And under this, we would want to link it to something. And do that, basically when we're clicking on this, we get here in the detail panels, just like in the main interface of the software. We can select a texture from here, and by default there'll be a bunch of different ones. For instance, we have this one that we imported, and you can see because we made many imports, we have many of those textures, but we can select that one, and we can pull this one in to the base color. And now we'll get that as a texture instead. We can click update, and we then get that texture applied. We're not going to be going too much into detail here, but we can now add a texture coordinate. There, and we can link this into the UV here, and then in that setting we can change this value to rotate or to repeat more. We can click update, and then now you can see that we can actually change this. We can change it also obviously in both values separately. So if we wanted to repeat or to be more like that, we can update it and save it. And last thing we can maybe try is to add a normal map. Actually, I'm going to change this texture coordinate so that it's the same in both directions. Save. And if we want to add a normal map so that it has some texture to it, we can either just copy this texture sample because it will be the same thing. We want a different texture, or we can hold in T on our keyboard and click, or we can right click and search for it, texture sample, and there'll be a bunch of different default ones we can try here. We can also search normal, and then we'll get all of the, so we have the brick texture that we downloaded before. You can open this also, but we can already see there, and then we can just plug this in and see what happens. Now obviously this will not match with the grid that we created, but we can see here that we have a nice brick normal pattern. We can update it here in the main view and zoom in and see that we can see the texture, the normal map texture. Then we can obviously do the same thing as we did before with the texture coordinate. We can, again, if we want to have a different texture coordinate for this normal map, we can copy this one, or again we can right click and search for texture coordinate, connect it to the UV, and then we can change this. Maybe we want it even less. We can type in 0.2 for instance and try to see what that looks like. Now we have much bigger bricks. Save, close, and that's the basic overview of material editing in Unreal Engine.